So I guess this is the place to begin. Let's begin with chapter 1.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1, August 13th, 2019, Tuesday. The ferocity of the first fat raindrops made it clear Elliot had misjudged the storm. He flew around the curve in the path and into the too wide exposure of the meadow, Lindsay hot on his heels as a flash of light lit the sky. The thunder that followed punctuated the need to find shelter, fast. "Can you sprint?" he asked. "For 3 miles?" she panted. "Forget about it. Let's get back to the woods." "No," he pointed across the meadow. "Maybe we can wait this out at the old farmhouse." "Isn't that place condemned?" Elliot registered the concern in her voice, but couldn't spare the breath to address it. He glanced down at his ankles, where moments before he'd been kicking up hot dust. Splatters of warm mud reached upward, clinging to his calves with every stride. He lowered his head, pumped his arms, and pushed his legs harder. The old farmhouse came into sharper focus. Weathered, clapboard siding that could no longer be called white, tall windows with cracked or missing panes, the wide porch with its decaying roof, the tired sign nailed across the front door with its red X against reflective white. It was 200 yards away, maybe less, when the sky opened and all was obscured behind a curtain of furious rain. They reached the low, young trees that had encroached on the field over the decades and slowed. Behind him, Lindsay was laughing as they took the 4 rotten steps up to the porch 2 at a time. She leaned, collapsed against the wall of the house. "And you said we'd beat the rain." He laughed as he folded his legs onto the floor of the porch. It was wet, and the wind sent sprays of rain into his face, but it didn't matter. He was already soaked. Judging by the quantity of water coming through the gaping holes in the roof, this could hardly be called shelter, but it was a million times better than the meadow. There was a magnetism to this place, and he wondered how he'd never noticed before. The farm had been here, like this, his whole life, sold to the town of Haverford as preservation land decades ago. He imagined it as it must have been, 7 acres, family run, in continuous operation for over a century. Now it was just this, encroaching trees and receding meadow, pressed up against the banks of the Pentucket River with this ruin of a farmhouse as the last holdout against nature's reclamation of the land. Around them, the roaring, constant percussion of the downpour began to ebb. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the rain ceased altogether. The hot August sun broke through the thick clouds, and back in the meadow, they could hear the songs of the birds. The transformation was instantaneous, and as the sunlight kissed the lichen-eaten wood of the porch, steam began to rise into the air. Lindsay put her hand on his shoulder. "Come on, Elliot, time to go. We've got 3 miles left in soggy shoes. Let's get it over with." He nodded, but lingered a moment before following her down through the young trees and back to the path. She started to run, and as he followed, he kept turning back for a last glimpse, then another, truly the last this time. He felt the place calling to him with the persuasive, comforting voice of an old friend he'd somehow forgotten. It pulled, and as his pulse quickened against the effort of his legs, he felt an inexplicable longing begin to bloom within him. It was an old farmhouse, crumbling at that, but maybe also the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen.
Wow. So I get the idea that this house is going to be important, right?
Right.
And we get this idea of a sense of place. Elliot is clearly drawn to it, and he heads back home where he has his fight with his mom and her awful deadbeat boyfriend, Tony. There are some nasty words thrown around about Elliot's sexuality, which he's been struggling with, and he has to get out of there. So he keeps thinking about this old farmhouse and gets on his bike and heads back there. he's killing time, taking pictures with his phone, and then something kind of amazing happens. Can you read a little more?
Yeah, of course. He started too quickly up the rotten steps of the porch and caught his foot on the second tread. As he fought to keep his balance, the phone fell from his hand and dropped neatly, perfectly, through a hole in the third tread where the wood had long ago fallen away. Shit, he said, steadying himself. He kneeled on the second step and peered into the hole, hoping the phone had landed softly. There it was, blessedly face up, laying in a bed of detritus, decaying leaves, bits of wood, and a bleached potato chip bag that was probably as old as he was. He reached his arm downward, and as he closed his fingers over the phone, they grazed through the leaves and made contact with something else, something cold and hard. After pulling the phone out again, he wiped it on his shirt and flicked on the flashlight. In the bright blue artificial light, he was able to see. Where his phone had rested, something round and metal barely protruded from the matted leaves. He reached down and, with a gentle wiggle, he loosened the thing and brought it up out of the hole. As he regarded the tiny treasure, a coin of some kind, an electric shiver started in his fingers, rippled up his arm, through his chest and legs, and dissipated out through his toes. He rubbed the coin furiously between his thumb and forefinger, cleaning away the years of dirt and mud. Then he folded it in the fabric at the leg of his shorts and repeated the process. It still wasn't clean, but at least he could make out the face. Odd, ancient maybe, or perhaps just made to look that way. On the surface of the dark, heavy metal, there was a raised symbol that looked like a scythe. Standing, he held the coin tightly and took the last 2 steps onto the porch. He leaned against the wall of the house and slid down until he was sitting, turning the coin over and over in his fingers as he descended. It was probably a trinket, not old or important at all, but in his present frame of mind, it felt like something more, a lucky coin, a talisman. With eyelids pressed together, he closed his fist around the metal and, without knowing exactly what he was doing or why, he started to wish. He laughed quietly to himself, because why not? There was a lot to wish for. He wished his mother, who'd been slowly retreating from him for years, would realize Tony was worse than any of the others who came before and get rid of him for both their sakes. He wished she'd find someone worthy of her, of both of them, and experience the happiness she'd once known with his father. He wished for the next year to pass quickly and for some scholarship money to come through, his ticket out of Haverford to a brighter future. And he wished for clarity, he thought, just a little clarity.
Right. So he finds this coin, basically makes a wish on it, and then dismisses it as probably just a piece of junk. He's still pretty fixated on the house and determined to find a way inside. So he gets down off the porch to look around, and he hears something that's about to change everything. Read a little bit more.
Oh, yeah. Then, from behind, a distinctly human sound, the aggressive clearing of a throat, froze his feet and lifted the fine hairs at the base of his neck. Slowly, he turned away from the house and found himself staring into the angry face of a little girl. Beneath her nearly black curls, the bluest eyes he'd ever seen pierced him straight through. Hands on her hips, she shook her head slowly. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked. He sputtered. Sorry, Why are you standing in the middle of my nasturtiums?" Elliot looked down at his feet. Nasturtiums grew at the Haverford Community Farm, where he worked a couple days a week, round, peppery leaves with orange and red flowers. The shareholders liked to harvest them for the weekly pick-your-own and add them to salads, but there were no nasturtiums here, only ferns and wood poppy, some wild bluebells, and low shrubs he couldn't identify. He looked at the girl again, really looked at her this time, and his eyes widened. She was short, with sun-kissed skin, somewhere between the ages of 6 and 8, he thought. Above her dirt-stained knees, She wore a denim dress in the style of overalls with buckles at the shoulder straps. A white and red checkered hem framed the bottom and the pockets sewn onto each hip. The dress was unlike anything he'd ever seen in a store, and he shivered. It was surely handmade and of another era. He continued to stare at her with terrifying certainty. It wasn't just the antique clothing. Something about the girl's skin was strange, a matte quality against the sunny day around them, as if she alone stood under a clouded sky. It was impossible, but this little girl was a ghost. Or so Elliot thinks.
Right. So they start to talk. Elliot goes back and forth wondering if he's crazy. The girl starts getting scared, and then what happens?
Seeing her fear, something broke in Elliot, and he was overcome with the urge to comfort her, crazy or not. He stepped forward and reached out a hand, but she let out a high shriek and stepped back into the low saplings. Only that wasn't exactly true. She stepped through the low saplings. As he looked at her, he froze. The trunk of a young maple now protruded straight through the top of her head. The realization she was a ghost after all raised the fine hairs of his neck. Elliot considered whether he should flee, but the girl was still terrified, so instead, he raised his hands and sat slowly on the ground. "Am I sitting in your flowers?" he asked. Cautiously, she shook her head. "No." "Please, will you leave?" "Not just yet. My name is Elliot. What's yours?" "Sophia." He nodded and smiled. "Okay, Sophia, I have a question for you." He continued to marvel at the tree protruding through the top of her head. If he couldn't see what she saw, then perhaps she couldn't see what he did. "Can you look at your flowers, Sophia? Did I crush any of them, or are they the way they were before I got here?" She cocked her head and crept forward, then around him, leaving a wide berth. When she circled back to the front, her shoulders slumped. "No, they're all okay, but you trampled them. I don't understand." "Neither do I." He watched her for a moment, her face more distressed than ever, until an idea occurred to him. "Maybe I'm your imaginary friend." Sophia's face smoothed into a smile. "You're dressed very funny for an imaginary friend." She looked past him back to the house, looked like she was listening. "This boy, Mama," she shouted. A few moments passed, and she continued, "Of course he's not there, Mama. He's my imaginary friend." She looked at Elliot. "Mama can't see you, so I guess you're right. You are my imaginary friend. Or maybe you're a ghost, but I don't think so." Elliot laughed, even as he shivered. "Oh no? Why not? I could be a ghost." "No, ghosts are bad. I'm protected from bad things." He bit his lower lip, thinking maybe he should tell her, but held his tongue. "Oh, how are you protected?" With a wide grin, she reached into one of the pockets of her dress. When she opened her closed hand, Elliot gasped. "It belonged to my no-no," she said. Pale, cloudy light lit the coin, cleaner and brighter than how he'd found it, but the same coin, to be sure. He touched the little pocket in the front of his running shorts to be certain. Yes, still there. The wave of sadness that descended upon him came even quicker than the summer storm an hour before. He stood, doing his best to keep smiling. It was very nice to meet you, Sophia, but I have to go now, if that's all right." She frowned, but nodded. "Nice to meet you, Elliot, my imaginary friend." He hurried toward his bike, leaning against the sapling a few feet away, and the denial washed over him. The moment he set his tires on the muddy path, beginning to dry now, he was away, feet pedaling furiously. Say it was true that there had once been a child named Sophia who lived on the farm. If she was real, if she was now the ghost he'd seen, then her little talisman couldn't have worked, and that was the saddest part. She believed in her suspended state that she was safe, But to be a ghost, to have died at such a young age, the irony was horrible. But then, turning back onto Pentucket Road, the denial returned. The roar of the Pentucket, less swollen than before, the sweet, thick taste of the humid air, the hot sun on his back, the call of the birds, the swarm of gnats he rode through under the shadow of a tall oak, these things were real. They were incontrovertible. Ghostly children and a lucky coin from an Italian grandfather, a no-no. And yet he could feel the coin in his pocket, feel its weight against his groin every time his legs turned the pedal cranks. This constant revolution of denial, acceptance, denial, spinning around in his mind as quickly as the bicycle cassette beneath his feet was maddening. There was only one way to break it, and as he turned into the drive down to the New Colony apartment village, he knew what he had to do. He'd find out if she'd ever lived, and if she had, he'd return to her.
Wow. Someone wrote in the chat that they got chills, and I think.
Oh.
So at this point, it's clear to Elliot, at least, that something is going on. Maybe it's the coin, maybe he's hallucinating. He's got a lot to figure out. But meanwhile, there are some other players getting ready to enter the scene.
And I'm guessing you're referring to Destin and Guillaume.
Right. Without giving too much away, the coin Elliot found is definitely more of a trinket, and it's woken up. And there are some beings that have taken notice. Can you read the excerpt introducing us to Destin?
Of course. 3,000 miles away, Destin Dupre sat in her lavish apartment in San Francisco's Nob Hill and gazed out the bay window at the setting sun. She wondered, absently, if she'd missed this view. The bits of the bay she could see shimmered golden, and the sky was painted in bold strokes as high, lacy clouds blew in off the Pacific. She'd enjoyed San Francisco, in her mind, America's most Mediterranean city, but she'd longed to return to Europe. She began to curse her luck, to lament these years waiting and watching when all this time the coin had slumbered in Haverford. But then she laughed a little and took another sip of her bitter Negroni. Better to live in California than Massachusetts. Boston was fine, but too small and cold for her taste. She took in the last of the daylight before the long, lingering gloaming began to usher in the night. The years spent in California had been good, an unexpected reprieve from her duties, but that all changed now. The coin was awake. She could feel the pull, the unspoken mandate to reclaim what was stolen. After another sip from the martini glass, she always preferred her liquor up. She retrieved her laptop from the floor and refreshed the page. Right on cue. Perhaps her influence these days was minimal, but sometimes minimal was enough. Town of Haverford, Office of the Mayor, Executive Assistant, vacancy to be filled immediately. She smiled as she clicked the link to apply, then attached the cover letter and resume she'd prepared earlier in the day when she'd set everything in motion. In the end, she knew it was unnecessary. The job was hers. In another era, she might not have gone to all the effort, might have just showed up. But times were different now, and there were digital trails to everything. There were inquiring minds, and as she acknowledged, her influence wasn't as great as it had once been. Perhaps that was about to change, but right now, in this digital age, an inflated resume was worth the effort. The Negroni was gone, so she went to the little bar cart and mixed herself another, delighting at the cold against her skin as she vigorously shook the metal shaker and watched its surface grow a frost from the humid air. She strained it into her glass and took up her former spot in the window. The sky was cobalt now, and as she took a sip of her fresh drink, nearly overflowing, she shivered with delight. Where was Guillaume, she wondered if he even called himself that anymore. Would he be waiting for her when she landed, the old foe, more of a friend than anyone she'd known in this life? And wasn't that ironic? Even through all the struggle, the world had always been her oyster, and yet The thing she longed for above all else was the presence and familiarity of her old nemesis. She laughed and drained her drink in a single, long, burning draw. It was time to pack.
All right, back to Elliot. So he's determined to find out what happened to Sophia, and he's dealing with his sexuality. He's gay, he knows it, and even though no one in his life really has a problem with it, except maybe his mom's boyfriend, he's having a really hard time accepting it for himself. As if things aren't complicated enough, now we throw into the mix Cameron Callisti, who used to be Elliot's best friend. Somewhere along the way they had a falling out, and we get the impression they haven't really talked in years. Cam has just started working on the same farm where Elliot works, and basically Elliot has to talk to him. Why?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. First, he's having a tough time suppressing his attraction. Cam is also gay, and he's out and happy and just, he's liberated. There's the physical attraction, sure, but there's also this allure to Elliot about just being able to be who he is. And the other thing is, the land that Sophia's farmhouse is on used to belong to Cameron's family.
Yeah.
So they're both Callistis, and Sophia is actually Cameron's father's cousin, which is confusing to me still, and I wrote it. So if Elliot is going to get to the bottom of what's going on, he's going to have to start by talking to the Callisti family, and Cam is his best bet to do that.
Gotcha. So the next morning, they have kind of an awkward interaction at the farm. Elliot is really struggling with being attracted to Cam, and coupled with the need to reestablish some kind of relationship with him, it's tricky. Later on, they find themselves in the tomato field together. Can you read that first real interaction?
Yeah, sure. It started with silence, plucking any fruits with a medium blush, pulling off the crowns and setting them carefully, shoulders down into the buckets. Through the thick foliage of the plants, Elliot watched Cameron watching him back. The tension was palpable. Elliot reached for a tomato a few inches off the black plastic sheeting that lined the row and cursed as it let go of the vine and rolled to Cam's side. I guess I'll grab this one, Cam said. Yeah, okay, Elliot replied, searching the ground in an effort to look at anything but Cameron's eyes through the dense wall of leaves in front of him. 7. Excuse me? 7 words. I've been back here a couple of weeks already and we haven't spoken at all. But today we're up to 7 words. Well, 9 now. So far you've said 9 words to me this summer. You're counting my words? 13. Hey, we're getting somewhere. Elliot scowled. Okay, this is getting awkward. What do you want me to say, Cam? I mean, actually, I've been wanting to talk to you. I need to, but... Elliot pushed his arm deep into the greenery as Cameron did the same. Their hands closed around the same tomato. Fingers touched. Cameron laughed, soft and warm, and Elliot recoiled. I'm not a leper, you know, Cam said. Yeah, I know. And you don't have to be so uncomfortable all the time. It's totally natural. For God's sake, it's 2019, Elliot. It's okay that you... I'm not gay. Cam flinched and raised his hands in the air, a gesture of surrender, a laying down of his arms. Sorry, I'm just saying, if you were, it's all right. Elliot sighed. No, I'm sorry. He could still feel the place their fingers had touched, searing, and wanted to feel it again. It was easy for Cameron. His family owned half of Haverford. He hadn't needed a generous scholarship to get out of town, to escape to that fancy private college in Vermont. Hell, he didn't even need to get out of town. Cameron Callisti was free to be whomever he wanted to be, and Elliot had always envied him that. Cam didn't have to live with an alcoholic mother who was most often absent even when she was present. He didn't have to suffer Tony, who'd so quickly identified a truth Elliot couldn't yet embrace. Cameron smiled and extended his hand through the tomato vines. Truce? He asked. Elliot closed his fingers around the other boys and felt the delicious thrill of their skin touching. He squeezed tighter and held his grip, knowing the gesture meant more than truce. It meant sorry, and you're right, and I'm not ready for this yet. And by the time he reluctantly let go, he knew that Cam understood all of it. They continued in silence for a minute while Elliot chewed his thoughts. He hadn't had a real conversation with Cam since they were 13, but now maybe it would be easier. Now that Cam had been given confirmation, that he'd been told without being told, maybe they could turn a corner. Maybe if Elliot could keep his feelings at bay. Halfway through the row, Elliot decided he couldn't wait any longer. Look, can I ask you something? Elliot demanded without waiting for a response. Your family, he stammered. They own the farm and the preservation land, right? Yeah, why do you ask? Do you know what happened there? I was running with my friend Lindsay yesterday. I know, Lindsay, Cam said. Elliot shook his head. Stupid. Of course you know, Lindsay. Sorry. Anyways, we got caught in a rainstorm and waited it out on the porch of the old farmhouse. I got a really strange feeling from being there, and then later I went back and Cameron had stopped plucking tomatoes. Elliot shook his head. It's stupid. Never mind. Oh no, you can't stop now. What, did you see a ghost or something? I think I'm going crazy. There was a little girl there. She said her name was Sophia. Cameron's expression darkened. Okay, that's not funny. Who told you about Sophia? She's real? Elliot sighed, feeling the tension in his shoulders break like the air in the moments before a summer squall. Seriously, who told you? The ice in Cameron's voice caught him off guard. Really, no one. Cam, am I going crazy? I swear I saw her. I talked to her. He could see he was losing him. And then there's this. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and handed over the coin. I found it underneath the steps to the porch. Cam took it cautiously, and his eyes widened. No shit. The awe and wonderment that lit his face spoke volumes. Careful and reluctant, he handed it back, a skeptic turned believer. I've heard about this. If it's what I think it is, my great-grandfather brought it over from Italy, some crazy story I don't entirely remember. I mean, he was dead 40 years before I was born, but wow. It was like the family treasure, and then it disappeared. I think my grandfather is the only one alive who ever saw it. So, what happened? It was terrible. My grandfather didn't have much to do with that farm. It was being run by his brother at the time, and Sophia was his daughter. That is, my grandfather's niece, right? The Pentucket flooded and washed the whole place out, and when the water finally went down, they found my grandfather's brother and his wife stabbed to death in the house. Elliot shivered, despite the hot August sun. And Sophia? Cam shook his head. That's the saddest part of all of it. They never found her. No one knows if she was killed too or if she drowned. Wow, and did they catch whoever killed her parents? Nope, it was never solved. There was a suspect, some boarder that was renting a room at the house, but they never found him either. I don't know. My dad wasn't even born yet, so all of this is majorly secondhand. Elliot regarded the coin still in his palm. I feel like, I don't know. I feel like I should give this to you, but I also feel like I was supposed to find it. Does that make any sense? Like, I can't stand to be apart from it. Would you mind if I held on to it for a while until I figure all this out? Cam shrugged. No one in my family has seen it for 60 years. Finders keepers, I guess. But what do you mean, figure all this out? Either I saw her or I'm losing my mind, but I know, crazy as it sounds, that I did see her. I think I need to find out what happened to her. Cam whistled, then laughed. Yeah, maybe you are going crazy. Good luck to you, Elliot. You'll let me know if anything... Yeah, he said, turning his attention back to the tomatoes.
I'm muted. So Elliot takes this new information and returns to Sophia, where he kind of confronts her about it, asks if she's a ghost, and it blows up in his face. She freaks out and swears she is alive. And in the end, it gets Elliot thinking, but he gives her some space, right?
Right. So he takes the day, he thinks, he does some research, and the next day there's another fight at home, and so we have sort of a pattern here. And he isn't sure where to go, so he goes back to the farm. It's sort of like becoming his safe place almost. And he is there to just like think about his life and her and everything really. And he sees her, and they have this breakthrough.
So he's sitting there kind of brooding, and Sophia sneaks up on him. Can you read a bit from that section?
Yeah, sure, of course. Are you sad because you're a mean boy? Startled out of his reverie, Elliot gasped to see Sophia sitting beside him. You have to stop sneaking up on me, he sighed. Still, I'm very glad to see you. She scowled. I wasn't going to talk to you anymore, but you looked very sad, like you wanted to apologize. Elliot laughed. Aw, Sophia, I am sorry. So you won't say those mean things to me anymore? Well, I'll try not to, but he took a deep breath. Sophia, I'm not really your imaginary friend. She crossed her arms. Yes, you are. That's why no one can see you but me. Well, see, that's what I'm trying to figure out. Do you know why I said the things I did? That I was a ghost? Yes. Because you're a mean boy? He laughed. No, and I promise I'm not a mean boy. I'm a nice boy who wants to help you. See, what year is it, do you think? She rolled her eyes. It's 1959. Everybody knows that, Elliot. Well, no. See, for me, it's not 1959 at all. For me, it's 2019, 60 years later. So you're from the future? He laughed. I guess. So maybe you can imagine why I think a little girl from 1959 might be a ghost. She considered for a while, slowly nodding her head. Okay, Elliot, but I'm still not a ghost. Well, I'd love to believe that, but how can I be sure? Leaping to her feet, she smiled, looking very certain of her answer. Because I went to market today with Mama. It's Saturday, and we always take vegetables to market on Saturday. And on the way home, we stopped in the cafe, and Mama bought me a piece of blueberry pie. Ghosts don't go to market. Ghosts don't eat blueberry pie. Ghosts don't eat anything at all. That's true, but he stopped mid-sentence. Saturday. It was Thursday. Did that matter to a ghost? Sophia, do you know what the date is? She nodded slowly. Saturday, August the 15th. And here it's Thursday, August 15th. Sophia, when did you last see me? Yesterday. You were mean, remember? He had an idea. It was crazy, but maybe. Sophia, does your papa get the newspaper? Yes. Okay, this is very important. Can you meet me here tomorrow at, say, 3? Yes. And can you look at the newspaper in the morning? Remember the headline, the first story on the very first page. Can you do that? If I do, will you believe me? Will you believe I'm not a ghost? If you do, I'm not sure what I'll believe anymore. But yes, you, I will believe.
So they hatch this plan. It's going to get the headline, and so will Sophia. And does it work?
So I think I'd better leave that to readers to find out.
You're not even going to hint at what comes next?
Okay, well, I'll just say that we're going to see a lot more of Cam and Elliot together, and Elliot ropes him into, trying to unravel the mystery of what happened to Sophia. And then there's Destin, you remember her, from California. And she is on her way to town because the coin, which you might have guessed is Elliot's connection to Sophia, is definitely more than a trinket, and she's going to do whatever she can to get her hands on it.
And can we talk about Guillaume?
So yeah, I guess we can talk about Guillaume. So at a certain point, the narrative in this book shifts, and up to this point, almost everything has been from Eliot's point of view. But pretty quickly, we jump to 1959, and we get to see Sophia's side of things. But also in the 50s, we have Guillaume, who is kind of like Destin's counterpart. In both timelines, she's there in Haverford trying to get her hands on this coin. And in 1959, we also have Guillaume, who will do anything to make sure that Destin doesn't get it.
Okay, but why? Like, what is it?
So again, no spoilers, but essentially, and I guess I'm spoiling a little bit, it's a relic from this forgotten Hellenistic culture. It's a symbol of free will, of humankind being able to choose its own destiny. And in the end, everything that plays out between Sophia and Eliot and Destin and Guillaume is part of le jeu, or the game. It's basically an experiment to see if humankind is better served by fate or free will.
And is it better served by fate or free will?
I'm definitely team free will, but I'll let readers decide which one comes out on top.
Oh man. All right. Thank you so much, Greg, for those readings. That was amazing. We're actually going to take a quick break, just a short minute, like 5-minute intermission. And then we'll be back with some question and answers. Thank you guys so much for posting your questions to the chat. If you have any more questions, please, please, please make sure that you reach out again. Your question entry will enter you in the special little $25 gift card, and everybody needs one to support your local bookstore. All right, welcome back after our intermission. I hope everyone used the restroom. I hope no one had to wait in the line. You're back for some question and answer section part. So we have lots of amazing questions, and actually Callie did ask this, so I want to kick it off. So what inspired you to write this book?
So I could probably talk for a whole other half an hour about that, but I'm going to try to keep it super short. So once upon a time when I was 17, my great friend Heather took me to see this old sort of abandoned bungalow that was on the outside of town in Fort Collins, Colorado, and we really fell in love with this place. And it was like a real wreck. Like, it was falling apart, it was falling down. You could see through the ceiling out to the sky, and it was just beautiful. And very shortly after we found it, it got demolished, and it had like this crazy impact on me. And I think I like cried about it, which is hilarious. But I don't know. I always thought that that would be like a great seed for a story. And so I, have carried that around with me now for like half my life. And when I finished my first book a few years ago, I was like, well, I guess I need to write another one. And, the old adage is to write what you know. And so I started to think about things that were in my life now that I really loved and that were important to me. And as a lot of you know, this is now my 5th season where I go and I help out 1 day a week at a little farm here close by in Lexington, and I love it. And I've just really, it's very important to me, and I've learned so much there. And I thought I could sort of marry these two things together, like set it in this setting that I really appreciate and enjoy, and also take the seed of this story and thinking about who could have lived in this, old abandoned house. And I mean, the two things kind of came together in a magical way for me. And so I'm really excited. Without either of those experiences, I don't think this book would exist. So
that's amazing. Jeff asked, and I thought this was like kind of a nice follow-up question. If you were to choose a supporting character from the Confluence to use as a main character in a new novel, who would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a really great question. Um, that's a tough one. So I think that I would choose either Cameron, because he's probably my favorite character actually in the thing. I just like his personality the best.
Mm.
I do think that Elliot is kind of, he's a little bit whiny, and he gets under my skin a little bit, which is funny since I dreamed him up. But either that or Elliot's friend Lindsay, who doesn't have a huge role in this, but in terms of like the idea of taking someone sort of interesting and spinning something else off, I think that she could have some adventures in her future. So yeah, that's another idea.
Cool. I had very different answers for that, but I'm also the reader of the book, so.
Oh, okay. I would love to know what your answers are. You can tell me later.
I would want to know about that, you know.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's probably a better answer, actually.
It almost would be, I think, just interesting to explore over time. Yeah. Michael is wondering, when you specifically, this is more about writing process, is like when you write, what comes first with the character, like what comes first, characters or the concept?
That's another great question, because a few months ago, I sat down to really start to try to write my third book. You know, we have all of this time, and it's like there's this expectation on everyone that we're going to use this time to accomplish something great. You're going to come out of this pandemic knowing how to speak several languages or having written a great American novel. And I think we all understand at this point that it's stressful right now. So that's not necessarily the way that things are going to work. But I think that for me, so anyway, back to Michael's question. So I try to have a rough idea of where my characters are and where they need to go, and then throw situations at them that will drive them in that direction. So I guess it's a little bit of both. Like, I need to have a general concept of what I'm trying to write, and then I think once I know the characters' personalities well enough, I can just put them in a situation and know that, okay, well, when Tony starts mouthing off and saying really hurtful things, Elliot's going to freak out and not stand up for himself and run away again. And that gets him to this point. And, you know, characters grow and change, but I guess that would be my answer. It's sort of character driven within a very loose shell of a concept.
Shai asked, what was the most difficult part of writing The Confluence and why?
Hi, Shai. I'm so excited that you're here. So the most difficult part was probably that the Confluence did not lend itself to the writing process that I just described. So because it takes place in two different times, there were all of these points where things had to intersect perfectly. So I had to have a lot tighter of an outline than like I was comfortable with. And I threw some of that out and kind of made it work as I went. And there were things that changed beyond what I originally wrote down. But I think the amount of planning was the part that was really hard for me.
Linda, and I'm just so everybody knows, I'm just kind of bouncing around. I want to try to get, I know some people have asked multiple questions and I will try to get to everybody, but I do want to bounce around to make sure I get some questions from lots of different people. Linda was asking, what is the first story you recall writing or age you were when you felt, okay, this, or was it a gradual progression for you to want to publish?
That is a great question. Thanks, Linda. So my mother is probably going to laugh because somewhere in a chest in her house, there's like a, what was that binding that you did with, like, it looked like a comb, like black plastic, You know what I'm talking about? Like not a spiral bind, but it was like a I can't even remember what that was called. But I wrote a short picture book called The Crystals of Meguti which was about like this young witch that found these magical gems that she did crazy things and saved the world with. And that was in third grade.
Of course,
But,
low third grade.
oh, it could have been fourth grade. Shoot, I don't remember. But anyway, I think pretty early on, I knew that I wanted to write someday, hopefully professionally. And that changed for a little while. For a little while, that shifted to music. I wanted to write music, but it's always been writing something. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was gradual. I think getting the discipline together to sit down and get a book written, and then everything that comes along with that took a little time, but yeah, I think I've always kind of wanted to do this. So
and to get back to the book, Kendra asked, does Elliot's story wrap up nicely, or do you think you would continue writing about Elliot in another book?
I don't think that I would continue to write about Elliot per se. I mean, I wouldn't rule it out, but Elliot's story and the story of this coin and Sophia and everything does have a pretty definitive ending. But I did intentionally leave some things open so that this universe could be expanded in the future if I wanted to. I'm not planning to do that right now, but it could be a series. But it's not one. It doesn't end on a cliffhanger. It's definitely one where you can read it, and if I never write another book about this, it's fine. And if I do, it's also fine. So, or at least I hope that's how it comes off.
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, it felt very concrete for me. Like that was the end of that.
Right.
It was very well done. It was very suspenseful up until the very last page. Elena asked, she said, I'm so excited to read this. Woo! How did you decide on the ages of the main characters, especially telling the part of the story through an 8-year-old? Was that a challenge?
Well, Elena, I'm also so excited that you're here. Learned so much farming stuff from you. So originally, actually, the characters were teenagers. They were 17 and going into their senior year of high school. And then somewhere along the line, we, during the editorial process, decided to age them up so that this was a little bit less of a young adult kind of thing, because I was looking for a slightly broader appeal than that specifically. So just wanted to go after a little bit different audience. So that's how Elliot became, he's 20 through most of the book. He has his 20th birthday at one point. And for Sophia, I don't know. I mean, I guess I really love interacting with children between the ages of, say, like 7 and 10. I just think it's such a cool age. Brian and I have a niece and nephew that are exactly in this age right now. And so that made it, easier to picture in my head. And, there's a fair age difference between me and my siblings. So I can sort of remember when they were at this age as well. And I just think it's fun. It's dynamic. There's still so much naivete in an 8-year-old, but they can also get things. They're incredibly intelligent. And I just thought that it's a fun, yeah. So I don't know. Hopefully that answers that question.
Speaking about siblings, Haley Josephs, she said, hey, Greg, I was wondering how similar is the finished book to the original idea that inspired it? Did you have a pretty set idea in your head of how you were going to want everything to play out, or did it grow organically as you wrote? If there were any major changes, what drove them? And also sending you a big hug and many puppy kisses from Colorado.
Oh, thanks, Haley. I have to remember all of the pieces of that question, and I probably won't. But I guess what I'll say about that is I think that I think that I am completely satisfied with how it turned out in the end because I was very open to, with all of this planning that I didn't want to do when I wrote this book, I had to be willing to compromise and I had to like problem solve through the whole thing. So, you know, one of the taglines for this book is the flood is coming. There's this big flood. There's this, you know, natural disaster that's going to like wipe all this stuff away. And honestly, this idea of this flood was like this aha moment that pulled everything together. So I already had this idea of having these parallel timelines and Elliot trying to figure out what happened to her, but then I didn't know what was going to happen to her. So I had to come up with something, and the answer ended up being this flood, this natural disaster. And so I guess I would say going into it, I didn't think that it was going to have any natural disasters in it, and then it did. And so I was, yeah, I don't know. I guess I was happy with where it went, and that's the nice thing about being able to write this freely is just I'll go where the story takes me, and I'll throw things in that get me to the point where I need to be. So hopefully that answers that question, maybe.
Erin asked, or said, this magical realism in your story reminds me a little of Neil Gaiman. Is there a specific type or region of mythology that inspired that part of your writing?
No. So I really like Neil Gaiman. Erin, you've read a lot more Neil Gaiman than me, and I will catch up one day. No, I think so. When I was sitting down to do this, the number 60 meant a lot to me. So, okay, I'm gonna mess this up, and somebody can look this up on Wikipedia later. But there's this fun word called sexagesimal, which means base 60, which is the number system that was invented by the Phoenicians. And that's why we have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. That's also why funny people like the French that I adore count to 60, and then they get to 69, and then they go to 60-10, and they count to 60-19, because they don't have 70 or 80 or 90. Because of the Phoenicians. And so I think when I like got set on the idea of Elliot and Sophia being 60 years apart, I wanted this coin to originate from essentially from the Eastern Mediterranean, you know, where Phoenician culture sort of was. And I leaned into that pretty heavy at the beginning, but then I kind of backed out of it a little bit, and you'll notice in the finished product that's not really there. But I don't know, that's sort of like a secret little thing for why it is the way it is. But yeah, I don't know. I made up a culture, so I made up some mythology.
You're your own inspiration.
No.
Stephanie, your sister-in-law asked, she said her Mike just said, this would be an excellent movie. Have you seen this as a movie in your mind? And if so, any actors come to mind for characters?
Yes, I think this would be an excellent movie. Actually, I would rather it be a miniseries if I got to pick, you know, just so you don't have to leave stuff out. But no, I haven't thought of any actors or actresses that would play these parts. I would like them to be people no one has ever seen or heard of before, so that you can be totally immersed in the story and not be like, oh, look at what that actor is doing this time. I don't know.
What advice would you give to aspiring authors?
I would say aspiring authors should stop calling themselves aspiring. Yeah. I mean, in the writing community, we're pretty strict on that. If you write, you're a writer. So just because you haven't published anything doesn't mean that you are not a writer. Just because you haven't finished anything doesn't mean that you're not a writer. But you should finish things. You should finish your work. And it doesn't have to be good. you just have to commit to it. You need to push other things out of the way. You need to make it a priority. And then, yeah, just do it. And it can be terrible at first, and then you can always improve it.
Absolutely.
But yeah, don't be aspiring, and just write stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have a very adorable question coming towards you. I'm not even gonna say that. That's gonna minimize what this question is, and it's a very real question. So it's coming at you. Hi, Uncle Greg. Congrats on your new book. Are you going to write a sequel? I've been listening to you reading, and I want a sequel. Love, Logan.
Oh, thanks, Logan Berry. Maybe, or maybe I'll just make a sequel just for you. I'm not going to rule it out, but you'll be quite a bit older before there's a sequel.
Also, there was another question, Kimberly. It said, where did you find inspiration for things like theme, storyline, characters, setting, dialogue? You sort of answered the theme, storyline, but maybe the dialogue we could explore a little bit more.
So dialogue is my very favorite thing to write. I could probably write a whole book that was just people having conversations. I don't know. I love when characters cut each other off. I love when they stumble over their words. I love when they talk over each other and talk too long or don't talk long enough. And yeah, so I don't know. I think my inspiration for dialogue especially is just listening a lot. I'm a huge NPR junkie. I love having the spoken word in my head. I'm sorry that you guys had to hear me impersonating a little girl, especially as my voice got drier and drier. But I think that, yeah, I don't know. I would really love to hear this book as an audiobook, just because I just want to hear the people talking. So maybe that answers your question, Kim. I don't know, but the other stuff, yeah, just the setting I'm living in inspired a lot of this. So, yeah.
All right, I think I'm going to do 2 more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. Callie asked another question. Have you ever considered writing a young readers novel series?
I don't think that would be my forte. I really loved trying to get into Sophia's head in this book and just let myself be sort of naive and under the age of 10. And gosh, it was a lot of fun. But I think that there's like a great responsibility in writing literature for children. Yeah. And yeah, I just don't know. I just don't know if that's for me. Maybe I could do it, but my heart is more in this sort of magical realism stuff that skews a little bit older. So yeah, probably not for me, but.
All right, last question. Beyond buying books, what are some ways readers can help authors?
Yeah, great question. So, yeah, this is something that is funny, and it's tricky, and lots of people don't know a lot about how this works. So have you noticed that every movie that you watch that has creative people in it, they're always playwrights or authors or whatever, and a lot of the time they're really, really successful. And the truth is, it's super hard to sell books, and most authors, myself included, are not here to end up in a mansion. And so apart from buying books, the thing that really helps authors is telling other people about their books. You don't even have to tell other people to buy their books. Just be like, hey, read this book. It's super cool. And leaving reviews. So this is my little plug. You guys have all dealt with so many plugs for me recently, but when you read this book, please, please, please leave me a review on Amazon. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It can be 2 or 3 lines. But when you do that, it improves the credibility of the book, and other people see that. And, we all shop on Amazon, and Brian and I, like anytime we're buying anything, not a book, we like love to look at what the 1-star reviews are to like see if people are kind of crazy or if there's really something wrong with this product we're thinking about spending our money on. So reviews are really powerful. And so, yeah, I would just say, tell people about what you're reading, be excited about it and share it, and then leave reviews, whether they're good, they're bad. Doesn't matter. People love to see that stuff, and it really helps. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to support like authors and small businesses. Like, definitely, you get something, leave a review. It's so huge. It's so huge. Megan also threw in one more question. Which of your 2 books did you find easier to write?
Definitely this one. Definitely this one. This one took, I mean, it took a long time with the planning and stuff, a few months, but when I finally sat down to write it, it only took like 8 or 9 weeks to get the first draft out, because I was really focused. And yeah, this next book is probably not going to be easy either, but definitely this one was easier. It's also half the length, so that really helped.
Really tighten it up.
Yeah.
So this has been like so much fun, but we are coming pretty close to that's Maple. We are coming pretty close to the end. Is there anyone you'd like to thank?
Yeah, so the other thing you guys should always do when you read a book is you should always go all the way to the end and read the acknowledgments, because there are so many people that go into creating a book, and people that you wouldn't even expect. So I have a pretty exhaustive list in the back of my book, and I'm really sorry if I leave someone out. I'm not going to read it to you word for word right now, but I'm just really grateful for a lot of people. I'm super thankful for Brian, my husband, who supports me emotionally through all of this, because it's a real roller coaster publishing. It's crazy. And I am thankful to all of my early readers, all of my work people, Morgan, Linda, Chris, many others. Aaron, you will always be my first reader for everything. So thankful for you for that. I'm really, really grateful to the community and the family that I found at the farm. Elena and Emmy and Tim and Allison and Betsy. I'm so excited that you're here with us tonight, and so many others. It has been so amazing working with you guys over the last 5 years, and I've learned so much from you. And yeah, I don't know. I just really love, in this book, at one point, Sophia uses a piece of lacinato kale as a sword, and that would never happen if I didn't get to, hang out with you guys in the dirt. So that's really neat. Yeah, I have to thank Patrick, my editor, and Susan, the editor-in-chief at Literary Wanderlust, who published this book. So many people in the writing community on Twitter and through Literary Wanderlust. Jeff, you're here tonight. That's so exciting. I can't wait for your book to come out too. Yeah, and I could go on and on. I have to thank my family. I have amazing parents and brother and sister and nieces and nephews and cousins and wonderful in-laws and Logan and Leah. I'm so glad you were here with us tonight. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I could go on. I feel like the light's coming on from my Oscar speech. Like I need to stop. But read the back of the book. It's pretty exhaustive, and I'm just really thankful for all of you. Everyone here tonight. I say all the time that authors can't live in vacuums. We write our words and we hope that they're going to go out into the world and people are going to find them and connect to them, and it's going to mean something to them. Even if it's just fiction, just entertainment, just escapism, and yeah, so you guys are that for me. You're my audience, and it means a lot. So thank you for supporting me and being here for this.
Woo! Great work, Greg. This is like truly an amazing night, and I think that I mean, I did read the book, so I can speak that this is a really wonderful thing. Like, this is a really wonderful piece of work that Greg produced, and I'm just so excited for everybody to get their hands on it and get to reading it. All right,
Well,
thank you guys so much. This is it. This is the end of the evening. Well, the formal event, but
yeah,
Greg's gonna hang around a little bit for some hanging out if you'd like. So thank you guys so much for everything. Woo, great job, Greg.
thanks.